Emily, thank you so much for just agreeing to be interviewed, have this conversation. I really appreciate it. Uh, I personally admire you as one of the earliest. I think you're probably the earliest, at least that I've met, in cannabis since I believe it's since 2013. You have two private funds. You backed such really large and successful companies like Green Thumb and Ascend Wellness. So my question to you is, why did you, for your third fund, did you launch an ETF?
Yeah, so Poseidon has had a long trajectory of investing on the private side. We still are investing in the private side as a firm in post-seed stage companies. So we still are doing that. And we brought in Patrick Rea actually came over to join us, who had been running Canopy Boulder, which is the longest running accelerator in the space. And so actually Patrick Ray, I said his name wrong. But he came over. We're very excited to be working with him. We've known him since January of 2014. So we're still doing that. And then we also have launched the ETF. And so, Morgan, my brother and business partner, has talked about he would love for Poseidon to be like the one-stop shop for capital allocation needs in cannabis. And we have been investing in the public markets for cannabis since before we launched the first fund to outside capital in January 2014. So we were running our own money in like 2012, 2013, when there were hundreds of names on the, on the boards, and we watched those companies kind of dip in and out of cannabis and saw many things happen in those early days. But it's been a great ride. And so after running that first fund for the last 9 years and watching how we could outperform the markets, we thought, why not open an ETF that democratizes access to our investment strategy and creates a conduit for both everything from institutional capital that can't touch it for whatever reason because of the custody situation and the liquidity profiles of the names, all the way through to the independent investors who have been, frankly, the backbone of this industry. And so we're a big fan of those independent investors. We've been, interacting with them on Twitter. We love the enthusiasm around it. And we thought it was a great opportunity to democratize access and be a good conduit of capital to the high quality names in the sector.
And so I notice in your prospectus that one of the big key things that jumps out is that you can leverage the ETF up to 150%, which is a pretty big deal because most investors I know cannot lever cannabis due to the OTC or Canadian listing. Can you talk to me about how you think about leverage as part of your strategy?
Yeah, why not add a little spice to this exciting and dynamic market? The way that Poseidon has always operated is we've always talked about being nimble and dynamic. And, we feel like the leverage, we call it applying intelligent leverage to this industry. And so it's not just leverage across the board, it's leverage essentially on the exposure of the swaps or the MSOs. That is just further indication of our conviction around the growth of the vertically integrated operators in the US. And so we've applied that. We think it's a great way to drive additional torque in the market. And we think these names are drastically underperforming due to the liquidity and custody challenges that we are all unfortunately viscerally aware of. But we do think that the ETFs in this market, and there are a couple of great ones, can be the great kind of institutional capital that does come into these names. And so we love the leverage. Again, it's just further evidence of our conviction. And we think that we're going to see, outsized opportunity from that. So
this is why I'm really excited to talk to you, and why I think it's so smart, because I think right now you have like 20 or 25% leverage. Like, if I understand, as of today, you're not really using that much leverage in the ETF.
As of today, I think we're at 1.3 times.
Okay, 1.3
today. Yeah.
Gotcha. But you can go up much greater than that. And so if I think about, and I think we share this philosophy, that when we see a path to uplisting, and just as a reminder who may not be listening, is the custody, all the legal US cannabis names trade on secondary or tertiary Canadian exchanges. They can't trade here. So the big kind of trade, or the big moment, is when, hey, there's some regulatory or legislative movement that allows them to eventually list on US exchanges. We're going to see that way before it happens. And so if I conceptually put myself in your shoes, Emily, and I say to myself, hey, we're seeing this. I know what I'm going to do as a private investor. But as an ETF, what's interesting about what I think Poseidon can do is Poseidon can say, oh, now's the time. We have been investing since 2013. We know what's coming. We're going to get a lot more aggressive on our leverage and a lot more focused. And you're going to give either nimble allocators, retail investors, fast hedge fund, the ability to get the cannabis sector, which has huge upside, but on steroids. Is that the right way that I should think about this? Is that when things start to happen, you really want to own Poseidon ETF as opposed to maybe some of the other ETFs, because you're going to have some extra juice.
So I can't, I think you have some great points. I can't say that, but I think, we're believers in our strategy. We invest in our own strategy. And so, I think we're there, and we're big believers on the way that we're setting up this portfolio to look. It's early days. We just launched in mid-November. And so we've been working towards getting to the portfolio that we really want to have. And I feel like today it really represents how we're thinking about the sector. So we're really excited about that. And I get excited to hear that you do understand kind of our perspective on the leverage. And for those at home, if you want to tune in, we do have information on the Advisor Shares website about it. So
yeah, that's also one of the great things of both you and MSOS,
yes,
who are on Advisor Shares, is you can see the listings at the end of every day and what you're investing and buying. And anyway, it was just my thoughts, and I know you're a smart investor, so I one of the reasons I was excited to have this podcast is just to expose. I don't think people have been thinking through just that unique feature of Poseidon, not only leveraging your almost 10 years of investing, to your point, but also just your ability to leverage when things start really happening. So.
Yep. And that's why we call it intelligent leverage.
Yes, no, and I love that. And I love that. And as an investor, I don't necessarily want you to be levered now, but I love the ability to lever when things start to happen. Especially because on a regulatory front, you may have a period where there's like 6, 12, 18 months before you get a listing change, and people will want access. Anyway, you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, you only have to look at if you look at the US operators and then you look at the Canadian names, you look at how they trade. That is what the Canadian names are what access to institutional capital looks like on a broader scale. The US names, even if you have tremendous news, it's just very hard to get the market moving. And so we're trying to kind of create that momentum. And that's one of the reasons we love working with Advisor Shares and the guys at MSOS and Mackenzie at MSOS. I mean, we need more people around the table, and like you too, like we need more people at the table, whether or not, like, we're not yet there of institutional size in the ETF, but we're obviously working on it really hard, and we'll get there. I have full faith in that. And that's just part of the process. But I think that, but we have an institutional frame of mind around how we invest in to your point about 10 years of experience of investing, not just in cannabis, but in cannabis capital markets. And so there are unique dynamics to this market that do come, you get sharper with it over time.
So besides leverage, how do you pick stocks in the ETF? And what makes it a little more different than the MSOS? What is Poseidon doing that's different in your mind?
Yeah, so it's interesting because MSOS is kind of a different vintage. They launched at a really different time with really different momentum, and so I do think they have different constituents in their portfolio. But Poseidon really, it was a strong fundamental case based on what we've seen in the first two funds. And so we really are leaning in on, we do love what we see in the top couple of tiers of operators in the industry on the MSO side. We love EBITDA. We love focus on fundamentals. We love focus on growth and preserving shareholder and protecting and growing shareholder value. And so those are all the things we look for in terms of the operators. We also look for the quality of the assets. So, it's not just about having the blockbuster location on, the key street, but it is about, really thoughtful selection of where the assets are located, the quality of the assets, and the quality of the markets. I was just talking about this morning. Not all states are created equally. And after investing in the space for 9+ years, we know that, for example, Washington State has different challenges than Colorado does, and Colorado and California have different issues. And then even on the East Coast, Michigan is almost more like a California, even though it's a more eastern state. It's more like California than it is like New Jersey, so not even all of the states on the, Midwest to the East are the same. So you have to be really mindful about how you think about each market and how the operators are approaching them. So we're just being really thoughtful about that. We've always been really focused on the fundamentals of the business, even when, other investors were running to the big pre-IPO rounds of some of the MSOs that barely even exist anymore. We were really focused on the operators who were focused on, strong fundamentals, EBITDA, growth, great assets, careful approaches to financing the business such that they could preserve and grow shareholder value, careful application of debt and sale leasebacks, like just really all of those things really have mattered in a very difficult operating environment, which we face today still.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because I think there's no probably finer example of some of the things you were talking about than your largest holding of Green Thumb. And so you were one of the first investors in Green Thumb.
Mm-hmm.
They're now very clearly, if not the top, one of the top multi-state operators. And I watch how they report, what they say, and it's like a machine, just from the outside. And I'm an investor in Green Thumb, but I would love to just hear your perspective on what you've seen from Green Thumb and why it's not only your largest position, but it's a big portion of the ETF.
Yeah. I mean, I kind of think of GTI as like the quiet riot. Like they went public in a time when there was a lot of companies RTOing they had a lot to say, some of those companies. And, it's like, spare me the lip service, folks, show me what you can do. And so, I reflect, we do a lot of writing and we really focus on transparency at Poseidon. So I was reflecting back through some of our newsletters and commentary for the investors. And, I found this one piece where I was writing about GTI and we were like, we think this is going to be, where this market is heading in terms of operational excellence and what it means to really, really drive a focus on the bottom line, drive focus on shareholder value. And it really formed our thesis around what we looked for in other operators as well, because we just knew that was the way to approach it. I mean, in the end of the day, cannabis is like wine and spirits or like any other consumer category. It's except that it's high growth and high, EBITDA margins in spite of the challenges of being a patchwork. I mean, yes, these are massive companies, but each massive company has such a challenge of the silo of each state, even if you'd like it to be brought together. But what's really interesting? And I know we talk a lot about interstate commerce. In fact, you and I dialogue a bit about on Twitter on this. Yeah. But I was talking with someone at one of the two massive wine and spirits companies here in the US. And even they have trouble in terms of pulling operationally together certain aspects of the business because they still face patchwork regulatory challenges. And I was like, we are just going to have to be prepared to be this kind of an industry. And I think, whenever you're looking at what you select to invest in, you look at the moats or the things that give groups the opportunity to run ahead of others. And I actually think that the challenging environment that we operate in makes it such that you look at the team and you're like, is that a team that can navigate through this and then separate from the pack? And that is exactly what we've been doing over the last 8-9 years.
And I love that you say that because, anyone who claims they know what's going to happen in cannabis is, you cannot listen to them because none of us know. And so I'm glad you said that because, Green Thumb, very clearly, it's either the best managed or it's in the top 3 easily, and they're very thoughtful. And I think that is so important because, we wake up and things change all the time. You have no idea what's coming. And the quality of the management could not be more important. And I agree with you on, Green Thumb on that. As a reference, since you brought it up on interstate commerce, just so everyone knows, it is my belief that there is a non-zero chance that interstate commerce could come. And I've written and I've talked a lot about it, so we don't have to go into it. And that it's helpful to have some kind of hedge for interstate commerce. But even then, I think, to Green Thumb, and I talk to insiders and they know that they have real brands. Mm-hmm. So it's not just that it's a limited license story. You go into other dispensaries with other companies and they're carrying dog walkers and they're carrying other Green Thumb. And so that's what I personally love. And that's clearly, if you look at the multiple of Green Thumb, people are reflecting that it's not just a regulatory barrier limited license story. It's much more.
Yeah. I mean, this industry, have you ever heard of Maslow's needs, the triangle of, Yes. So I feel like our industry has been like this. Get doors open. So that's our food and shelter. Okay. Get the doors open, grow weed. Okay. Now we're laddering up, right? We're creating unique retail experiences with beautiful doors, consumption lounges, all of these awesome things. And then it's going to be about brand. But we can't get there if the base of the pyramid is not there. So we got to get the doors open. We got to grow good weed. And as Anthony Georgiadis says, dank at scale. But, I think that we're getting there and I'm excited by where we're going with this. And that is, you're absolutely right. It's like, okay, so the team is part of the moat, but also so is the brand, so is the retail experience, because this is how CPG works. This is how wine and spirits work. We have to draw affinities to the people. And, the Roth conference, I want to say 6 years ago, they had a panel of craft beer CEOs, very big, impressive ones, some of which had sold in massive multiple exits. And, but one of the guys was saying, and I thought this was a harbinger and something we have to watch for. He was like, what became a challenge for us was that we didn't do a good job of branding individually. IPA became a brand. And so people had an affinity for IPAs, blondes became a brand. So people had an affinity for blondes, but they weren't like, I need Lagunitas or I need Ballast Point. They were like, I'll try an IPA. That's what I want. And then some people did, but it wasn't on a whole, it was more towards a type of beer. And so that's something, in the industry where we're talking about terpenes, we're talking about strains, you have the exception of Cookies, who's created their own strain names. And so an affinity, and it's also tied to a burner, it's tied to a brand. So they've actually created this whole halo around strain, but we just have to be thoughtful about how we continue to build brands to create actual consumer products here.
And even more important of why management is so critical is not only that, but that each state is kind of like its own country. And you have to reproduce the same product in multiple states, and you have to try to get a consistent quality. And you just think about, and this is every insider, I'm sure you would say the same thing, producing really good or great cannabis at scale is just incredibly hard. So
incredibly hard.
yeah.
Yeah, because in each state too, you have different regulations about like you can have a greenhouse somewhere, you can't have that somewhere else, I mean, and so, learning how to cultivate at scale, getting genetics at scale. I mean, this is much harder than people think. And that aspect of it, especially retail. I mean, I think we've seen that the people would like to have more access to cannabis. So like, we got to get the doors open and in good locations, and yeah, we have to have a great retail experience as it gets more and more competitive. But the cultivation piece, I think those are the areas where you have the widest range of opportunities for failure.
Yeah, no, for sure. I see that you have Ascend Wellness as your third, at least as of yesterday. I don't know, it's your third top position. And I wanted to ask you, I know that you were one of the early backers, you're a large existing investor. You're also on the board.
Yes.
And so I wanted to talk to you about what your thoughts are on Ascend. And as an investor in Poseidon, is there a conflict of interest that you're on the board or you're not? And how do you think about Ascend, your ETF, and your position in it?
Yeah, I'm glad you raised that because I saw some commentary about that the other day. So yeah, we were early in it for sure. I am on the board. So Poseidon is an SEC registered firm. We have an SEC and compliance team outsourced that has I just had a call with them today. We have a call every week. And they're probably going to watch this recording when we're done. Hi, John. They're fantastic. They're right on it. And one of the very first things we did, especially with the ETF, but actually for the entire firm, is to put me in a walled off kind of garden, and we had it reviewed by lawyers. It's been reviewed by every single person, including the Ascend team as well. So I'm in my own universe. We have a very clear protocol around Morgan and Tyler and how they navigate that company in the ETF. And so I'm very much on my own and can't talk to them about anything really relating to the company. So I think, just to share, I mean, there's a through line to the companies that we really like. And I think that, Abner Curtin, the CEO, founded that very much, I think, inspired by who he thought were the best in class operators in the original round of MSOs. And so I think that's just, when you look at the companies Poseidon likes, we really focus on, the assets and the EBITDA profile and the team. And again, the brands, you make a really good point about that. And also being forward looking in terms of the retail strategy, because we do believe it will be more competitive. We don't believe in, overspending on retail, but we believe in thoughtful execution around retail so that people will, if they have a choice, they come back to your door. So just like with, coffee is a really good, actually, if you think about it, coffee is a really good analog to this industry in many ways, because it's kind of this commodity with a halo around it. But
I was listening to a podcast, and I'm blanking on the name. I should have it here, but that there is a female like designer cannabis brand that has partnered with Ascend.
Edie Parker.
Yes, Edie Parker. Thank you. I should have done it. Yeah. Anyway, listen, and what I really loved is if you listen to that podcast, it's not about Ascend, it's about Edie Parker.
Yeah.
Is they've partnered with Ascend, and she specifically said Ascend gets brands. They understand it. And so I really like that in terms of, and then just another, I'm a big fan. I even tweeted it out. I'm a big fan of your podcast that you do every week. I haven't listened to this week's yet. And you had the CEO of Ascend in Massachusetts.
Yes. Who
was just really impressive and very thoughtful and brought a very interesting perspective. And just, anyway, so I can definitely see that you've thought a lot about Ascend, that it really well, and that and then it makes sense that it's a position in your fund. So thanks for addressing just the.
No, I'm really glad you asked it because Poseidon, we really work hard to, we've always, even early on, we've set ourselves up to be an institutional quality firm and upheld standards that, we just feel like are best in class and in terms of transparency reporting. We've been audited since day one. And, it was a fun exercise to go through the SEC registration process, but it was also a point of pride for us because it kind of reminds me of Jason Wild. Like we started with our own money, which was about $100,000, in 2013, 2014, took everything we have. And we've invested in every strategy right alongside of our investors, kind of as we've had some liquidity events, we've continued to invest. And so, I hate to see have anyone think that we're doing anything other than exactly how we're supposed to be doing it.
Yeah, thank you. So your fund is still small. Your ETF, not your two existing funds. Your new ETF is still small. I think it's a little over $7 million now. You might have the right.
Yep.
So I'm curious because I'm used to the more private world of raising money.
Yeah.
How do you attract, outside of this interview, which is just going to rain money down? No, I'm just kidding. How do you attract assets to your ETF? I don't even know that world. Like, how do you think through that? If I'm an investor in Poseidon today, how should I be worried that it's going to be like 7 or 10 million?
I mean, you got to start somewhere, right? And it seems as though with ETFs, you really you get to a certain level and then you can start talking to the bigger RIAs and then you kind of keep going from there. So it's definitely a cumulative effect. You start and then you get to a certain size and then that attracts a whole lot more. So I think kind of like the industry, it's a stair-step growth story rather than just a linear one. And so we're just in the early days. I've been saying to the team, like, wow, we launched this thing right into a buzzsaw. It was an interesting time to open the fund. I mean,
oh man, you and me both. People were congratulating me. They're like, oh, I was starting in November. You're getting the best timing ever. And this is so great. And then it was like 4 weeks later, I was like, where are those people now?
Yeah. I mean, as one of my favorite lines from one of the institutional investors in the space says, down 5% is the new flat. And then he was like, I'm revising it to down 10% is the new flat. This is on the market, by the way, just in general.
No, for sure.
But, like we were like, oh man, like, for those of us who are high conviction, the entry point is fantastic. Like we're so excited, but we also know it cuts both ways where like the sentiment to invest into our vehicles is challenged, just like the sentiment around the sector is challenged. So we've got to overcome that. And, I saw this quote from Steve Martin and I just like, it's my mantra right now. And it's be so good, they can't ignore you. And I think that's going to be, we're just going to keep executing like and just keep doing. We believe in the strategy. We believe in the sector. We believe there are fantastic dynamics that can create a lot of return potential. And we'll just have to keep leaning in on it and keep raising awareness. It's early days. For us, it's a whole new endeavor to be talking about a public strategy because we've been in the private fund land for so long or so limited in what we can talk about. And so having a new strategy is a very new experience for the firm.
And I like this, and maybe I'm biased because I am a public investor and I have investments in the cannabis. But what I really like is when I see someone with your experience, which I don't know many people have been investing. I think you might be the only one I know that has been investing this long, and that you have been investing in the private space, and I understand you still are, but for you to then open a vehicle that is public, it kind of tells me like, hey, there's value. It's confirming to me on my own biases that, hey, there's value here. There's value that people are missing when you have one of the smartest private investors who has seen almost every thing that you can see so far in cannabis to say, hey, we're opening an ETF to invest in the public space.
Yeah.
It's telling to me.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I wanted to, speaking of that experience, what what has surprised you in the past 9 years? And I'll even add on to that question, as a relative cannabis newbie investor. Not only what is surprised, but what do you think most people are missing when they invest or research in the cannabis space?
It's a great question. Yeah, I saw you. I mean, what has surprised me is how quickly actually progress has been made on a state to state level and actually country to country level around cannabis. You know, when we first started this, and so this is like to the upside, this has surprised me, to the point where when New York did vote to legalize on an adult use level, as we all know, implementation's taking a long time and not surprising. I was pretty moved because I actually didn't think when we first launched, I wasn't sure I'd see that inside of 10 years of having launched our firm. So the state to state progress, and, you know, Cy Scott from Headset and I were cracking up because we were in the middle of something. And then we were like, oh, Arizona opened, like, and it just used to be like these huge moments when these markets would open, and it will be like, I have to be in New Jersey the day that adult use opens because I'm just so excited for it. So some of those things have been, you know, those moments of progress have been surprising to the upside for me. What is surprising to the downside, and I think what has surprised investors, especially as I watch the animal spirits in the Reddit world and Twitter world, is the disconnect at the federal level. And I think that surprised a lot of us to the downside in 2021. They've had so many chances to get this passed. They have so many advocates inside of the industry that are continuing to work and contribute. By the way, contribute their own dollars and portions of their sales to criminal justice efforts around cannabis to right the wrongs of the extremely racist and egregious war on drugs as it pertains to violent cannabis offenses. And so I think instead the politicians are just I actually feel like they're exploiting that whole thing and pointing the finger at business, saying you're exploiting progress. And instead, they could have just passed safe and then worked with the industry, and the industry would have gladly put a lot of effort and continued to put a lot of effort into. There goes my tripod. Criminal Sprout. She's on Twitter for folks.
Yeah. Oh, I love that picture you posted earlier today.
I could hear her at the door. She's just like, "Can I come in and hang out?" But yeah, I think that that surprised me, not to the downside, but it surprised me, because I really did think 2021 was going to see the change that we all deserve, and that the small business owners in cannabis and the social equity applicants deserve to gain access to just some traditional banking resources.
Yeah, no, it was interesting watching how that all, you know, and it's one of these things where I don't normally pay attention as an investor, but just watching how the sausage is made, it can be a little dispiriting. I don't know if that's a word, but it's not a great, it wasn't a great feeling watching that and being like, this doesn't make any sense whatsoever. I wanted to, so you work with your brother.
Yeah.
I have two of them. I could not imagine working with them. I mean, maybe I could, but I'm just curious, like, what is it like working with your brother?
Oh, it's a fantastic. Being okay, you know, I would say that there are a couple of and this goes for all business partnerships. You have to have a tremendous amount of respect for your business partner / brother and feel that that person also has a lot of respect for you. And Morgan and I do have, we kind of share a brain. Half the time we have the same thought about something at the same time, but we also do have a different way that we approach things and that we look at things. And so I feel like that is where we get into really interesting dialogues that help us to be a better shared brain. So the other thing that I would say, so you have to have respect for each other, which we do. You have to kind of know your lanes of where your strengths are, which we do. And I think you also have to be ready to talk about things right away if something, if you should have a heated exchange, you have to have like the humility to acknowledge your part in that, which very rarely happens with us. But I mean, I think it would happen with anybody in the tense environment of cannabis, that you have like those moments where you're like, but it's like, so, I mean, we always talk about, in an emerging industry, we've seen so many people come and go, and I couldn't do this without him. And I think he couldn't do it without me. But I think that importantly, you have to trust your business partner beyond the shadow of a doubt in terms of their decision-making, their quality of their character, and their ability to actually execute and keep driving through a very difficult environment. So I feel like I couldn't have done it with anyone else. And then
That's great.
What is cool though, is that the people who I think are attracted to working with Poseidon are also of that quality of character and drive. And so, you know, I feel like the Poseidon family is an amazing extension of that. And so I couldn't say enough about the other folks that we work with at the firm, you know, like Mike, Tyler, Patrick, and Andres. They're just all super high integrity people. And when I hear them in sometimes, you know, you get a chance to overhear your colleagues speaking, they don't know that you're there or on a call or something. I'm always really proud. So I'm grateful for all of them.
That's wonderful to hear. I see that you're on the board of the initiative, an
Mhm.
accelerator for female cannabis leaders. And I would love to hear more about your work with them, also in that you're not only one of the earliest investors in cannabis, but you are a female leader
Yeah.
in the cannabis industry as well. And I'd love to just hear your thoughts on the initiative, and then also just you being a female leader in the industry.
Yeah, so the initiative hasn't really been active since the pandemic, just because it kind of put, you know, accelerator models in a little bit of a different spin, but it was a really cool initiative. It was founded by my friend Amy Margolis, who, again, like, I think a theme is like, she was all action, less than talk. She noticed there was a challenge around female mentorship and female funding for female startups in cannabis. And so she just put it together and did it. And she called me and asked me if I wanted to participate. And I did. And, you know, Poseidon as a team is also extremely, like, I feel like the guys on the team are major feminists. And so we went up there as a team in their last cohort, and each person on the team did a presentation and worked with the founders and continued to consult with some of those female founders after after we were there and after the cohort ended. Obviously, I'm a big fan of female founded businesses. Poseidon is female founded, co-founded. And I think that, you know, Rosie Matteo and I talk a lot about this, and there's quite an impressive group of women in cannabis, albeit smaller than I think we'd all like it to be. But the ones who are here are very strong. And I think that we talk a lot about like being in the room. And for us, the room is where decisions are made. And so we talk a lot about male advocacy for females, the males that do bring women into the room and make us a part of the discussion, because it is, I mean, really, in the end of the day, it's all about network and about access. And so we feel like it's our job now to pick up the torch and kind of create our rooms where we invite people to. And so we just try to be really mindful of that. And in fact, a group of us women in the industry just got together last week for kind of like a social and work gathering. And I mean, immediately I saw two instances where, you know, we were hanging out and I was like, oh, I actually wanted an introduction to this. Boom, introduction made. Or I'm trying to do this like workaround reference check on a potential hire for one of our companies. Boom, I know somebody that they worked with for 2 years at this company, and we got right on a conference call. And that's what it's all about, is it's access. And so we're really trying and making introductions. And so that's really what my work as a female leader is about. It's about really trying to be a conduit and create access points and creating more rooms for people to be at. Like I always say, it's like there's that old notion of like, I made it, now I'm going to pull up the ladder. And I always say it's about not being sharp elbowed at the table. Like, just because you're the only woman who got invited to the table doesn't mean you can make more room for other women at the table.
That's great. I also see that Poseidon has a mastermind program.
Yes.
And can you tell me more about what that is?
Yeah. This is definitely, Patrick has got that amazing capacity for working with early stage founders. Because as I mentioned, when we launched Poseidon, the whole industry was early stage. And so we were by nature working with early stage founders. We just feel like there's not a lot of attention being paid to early stage founders in cannabis. So the Mastermind program is not an accelerator, but it's kind of to that exact point of what I was just talking about with creating access points. It's kind of allowing companies to participate with us, where we try to help to pull them along and create access points, give them mentorship, introduce them to different leaders in the space, and just kind of create more of an ecosystem around early stage founders than exists today in cannabis. If you look in, traditional Silicon Valley, for lack of a better word, but we know Silicon Valley is really everywhere now with all the remote working experiences. But the reason people used to move to Silicon Valley when they were founders, even though it's so expensive, is just to be able to like walk into the Rosewood bar and see, some of the VCs or see other leaders of major tech companies for the chance to potentially speak with them. But if you surround yourself in a network effect with an ecosystem of high quality people, it gives you a little bit more access. And mentorship, and that's what we're looking to do at the Mastermind.
That's great. My last question for you is, what predictions do you have for this year for the cannabis? Do you have any predictions that would surprise us, or things, that you just feel like either surprise? I'm just curious of what your thoughts on what this year will bring.
Yep. Well, they say the past is prologue. So here we are. It's a new start. And I think that, the way we're approaching 2022 is we'll continue to lean in on our political efforts, because we do believe we have to try to be change agents at the federal and state levels. Mike on our team is on the board of the CCIA in California, a troubled market at least. So he's doing the good work over there. And then we do work with a federal policy action group that we think very highly of. And so we will continue to lean in. We do that, by the way, with the GP, in other words, with like our resources, not the funds or the firm's resources. It's us. Because we're, in the absence of us being present at the table, someone else will be present. And it may not be a group that is aligned with the success of this industry. It may be the pharmaceutical industry, it may be big tobacco, and maybe they are aligned with the success of this industry. But if the cannabis industry isn't at the table, someone will take our seat. So we've got to be there. That being said, for 2022, I'm going to say nothing happens. I'm going to say we see zero federal reform. How's that? And guess what? Who cares? Because this industry has built multi-billion-dollar businesses in spite of the lack of action at the federal level. I think they had 8 cracks at SAFE since I've been in this industry, and they haven't got it done. So guess what? Forget it. But I'm going to stay at the table, and we're going to continue to get our points across and talk about the things that matter. And we will do that. But I don't think anything happens. I think no capital markets reform happens. And I think that it is fine, because I think that, I meet with institutional investors all the time. You're an institutional investor. We're institutional investors. There is more money coming to this market, because when you look at the multiples, when you look at the fundamentals, it is far too interesting to sit on the sidelines. And so I think we will still see escape velocity in 2022, in spite of the fact that we do not see federal reform. And I think it will just be building into 2023, 2024, and 25. I think it's going to be, we're going to be on the precipice of a tremendous story here.
I agree with that. And I have no idea what's going to happen. And people ask me, what do you think? I literally have no idea. But it is so fascinating that in the next 12 or 18 months, the entire Northeast is going to go adult use, which may also include Pennsylvania, but you're going to have New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, which is the entire financial industry. Then you're going to have possible Pennsylvania, you're going to have Maryland, and you're going to have Virginia. And what is going to be so fascinating, my whole thesis on cannabis rests on the pure absurdity that it's illegal. And so I love pointing that out, but it's going to be really fascinating over the next 12 or 18 months when the halls of power of finance, cannabis is legal and everywhere and being sold in incredible numbers, and in the halls of government and where people live, and cannabis is going to be everywhere. It is going to be fascinating to watch if there is legislative inaction while that is happening. I can't wait.
I couldn't agree with you more.
Yeah, it's going to be fun to watch. Emily, thank you so much for your time. This was awesome. I'm going to put in one last plug for your podcast with Cy Scott, High Rise, right?
Yep.
And I listened to it. It's just a great weekly podcast. Thank you for doing that. And keep writing, keep sharing on Twitter. What's your handle on Twitter? Is it just your name?
It's EMPAX1. MPAX1.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for doing this interview. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. And thank you for doing the good work, and, glad to have folks like you at the table bringing good mind share to the space.